Hello and welcome to this originally produced podcast from the University of Central Florida's Office of Global Perspectives and International Initiatives. I am Lundon Sheilds, the Diplomacy Intern. Joining me today is the esteemed Owen Kirby, Regional Director of the Middle East and North Africa region at the International Republican Institute, as well as the former Director of Office of Transition Initiatives at USAID. Additionally, Mr. Kirby serves as non-resident fellow here at our Office of Global Perspectives at the University of Central Florida. His impressive work does not stop there. Mr. Kirby has served as the Senior Governance Advisor for the U.S. Department of State in Afghanistan and has a prolific writing portfolio, which demonstrates his dedication to regional conflicts specific to the Middle East and North Africa region and the implications of contemporary and historical, political, and economic context of the region. Mr. Kirby, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, London.
The first question is based off of your article, Does Calling It Western Sahara Solve Anything? We'd like to ask, you provide a deep insight into the potential of the Western Sahara region and the lack of help for a large proportion of residents in the region suffering from political and economic instability due to its colonial and neocolonial history. Could you expand more on what the U.S.'s goals should be in the region to properly develop it?
The Moroccan government has made significant investments in the what was formerly known as the Western Sahara, but is currently the southern provinces of Dakhla and Laayoune of the Kingdom of Morocco. While the United States, during the first Trump administration, recognized Moroccan sovereignty, reversing many years of the U.S. remaining neutral while the issue of the Western Sahara was being negotiated by the UN. We're now in a place today where not only has the United States recognized Moroccan sovereignty, but increasingly so have European nations and nations around the world. And at the present time, I believe there are somewhere in the region of 40 foreign consulates in Dakhla and Laayoune. So there's a recognition that things have changed on the ground, that Morocco is not about to cede what it believes is its sovereignty over these historic lands. So if we want to ensure that the Sahrawi people have benefit from the developments that are taking place, if we want the Sahrawi people to realize the potential of their historic homelands, then we have to, I think, put some effort into both Moroccan initiatives, but also perhaps initially some American and international initiatives to ensure that the Sahrawi people aren't left behind. The ambitions are quite grandiose for the region. The infrastructure that's being developed in terms of transportation networks, a massive port, are leading the way for increasing foreign investment in the region. This will be the port and the transportation networks will be a gateway for landlocked nations in sub-Saharan Africa to have access to international ports for their own goods, whether natural resources or manufactured products. So for this all to succeed and for the Sahrawi people to benefit from it and not be pushed aside, then I think there needs to be a concerted effort to ensure that they have both the opportunities but also develop the skills and capacities needed to be productive, both be productive members or participants in the developments, but also beneficiaries. And at the present time, much of the Sahrawi population resides in refugee camps over the border in Tindouf in Algeria, and to some extent, they are pawns in historic tensions between Morocco and Algeria that may or may not have much to do actually with the Sahrawi people or any perceptions of rights to self-determination. So they are suffering while their land is currently being developed in a way that should benefit them. So I think we have the United States, both for the stability of the region and in support of our ally Morocco, we should probably be putting some effort, both diplomatic and in terms of foreign assistance, to ensure that the local people aren't left behind as the land is developed, and hopefully there's increased prosperity for the region.
And so expanding upon that, Do you think the Chinese-led economic and infrastructure development projects, such as the Belt and Road Initiative, which Morocco has also participated in, do they present difficulties or complications?
It's interesting. While the United States has recognized Moroccan sovereignty and has announced that it will open a consulate, we announced 4 years ago that we would open a consulate in the region. We have yet to do so, but the Chinese have. The Chinese are one of the 40-odd states that have opened consulates in the region because they see the economic potential. They see the importance of having this access to this port on the Atlantic to serve increasing markets for them in sub-Saharan Africa, and also as a gateway to resources that they need to access to continue to propel their own economy. The difference between the U.S. approach and the Chinese approach is, the Chinese approach is, for lack of a better term, it is very self-serving. The Belt and Road Initiative is about it's about the Chinese economy, helping it continue to grow. Not that we don't have economic interests ourselves around the world,
Of course.
but the Chinese investments or interest in North Africa are less about stability and more about access to resources and access to markets. And the Chinese modus operandi when it comes to developing infrastructure in states and countries and where they're interested is to bring in their own personnel, their own manpower. This is not about employment opportunities for Moroccans. It's not about Moroccan stability. It's not about the well-being of the Sahrawi people. It's only about access to resources, access to transportation networks in marketplaces.
Considering recent domestic political changes and the Trump administration's brief freezing of all foreign aid, which the Supreme Court has ruled against, do you think the future of foreign aid is threatened by this change in perception towards U.S. foreign spending?
And I believe that foreign assistance will come back online. I mean, clearly it's not going to be at probably the level or look like it did prior to the suspension. But I think the realization is going to dawn on people that soft power tools and foreign assistance is part of this, it is in our national interest, that we cannot continue to fund our military to serve solely as a protector or guarantor of U.S. national stability and U.S. national interest. There's no military solution to the spread of infectious diseases, whether it's Ebola or even measles in our own country these days. If we look at migrations that are happening, whether it's on our southern border or up from sub-Saharan Africa to North Africa and across the Mediterranean, these are not military challenges. These are challenges of failed economies, failed states, lack of opportunity and oppression, and there's no military solution to them. And as we see these migrations occur, we see the spread of infectious diseases, we see the spread of terrorism as well that come from frustrated people. So with, absent our soft power foreign assistance tools, which can hopefully get at the root of some of these problems, there's no military solution, there's no solution, frankly.
So, reflecting on NATO foreign policy in North Africa, namely Libya, what lessons can we draw on the nature of U.S. military involvement and intervention, and how it can create instability in North Africa and throughout the rest of the continent?
I think sadly when you look at the situation of Libya, and Libya is a good example today, we see a case of, there was an intervention when Gaddafi looked like he was, poised to slaughter many of his own people. We saw an intervention by NATO forces that had no planning for after the fact. By creating the conditions that helped to overthrow Gaddafi, we gave little or no thought to what came next. We helped break the system, even though it was a corrupt and oppressive one, but walked away when the Libyan people really needed our support to get back up on their feet. Today, in the absence of the U.S. in a leadership role, with the U.S. having ceded responsibility for patching Libya back together again to the UN, we've seen very little progress to date. And our NATO allies, therefore, have been left to tend to this matter by themselves, and they've all been looking at it from sort of a singular, sort of self-serving perspective. We have, Italy and France very concerned about migrants. The flow of migrants is probably the number one concern that the southern NATO states have, and each of them are cutting their own deals with various power brokers in Libya to help staunch that flow of immigration. So instead of having a holistic, we're only going to have a holistic, sort of effective approach to the country if America is in the lead, takes the lead. Absent American leadership on this issue, and this has proven the case, it's almost every man, woman, country in Europe for themselves, looking after their own interests. Some countries have interest in access to oil, of course, and gas. Others want to just stem the flow of migrants. So we're seeing a patchwork of various foreign policies at play in Libya today, with no sense or I think, hope in the near term that we're going to see a resolution of this state that's bifurcated between two governments and run by militias.
Getting the U.S. back involved kind of to patch up almost that power vacuum and continue almost where we left off would probably be the best intervention, you believe?
This is it's a very wealthy country, but it's a potentially very prosperous country, one that could play an important stabilizing role in North Africa. I mean, its economy has great potential, but at the moment, the country is basically ruled by mafioso. It's a system of rackets in which every group is getting their share. I'm not saying this is the U.S. responsibility, but absent U.S. leadership, we just don't have, either interest or capacity in really playing an effective role, we the world, in seeing the situation in Libya being resolved. American leadership is critical. We've seen this before in Libya, in Syria as well as Libya and elsewhere. Absent America taking a leadership role and bringing our allies together to achieve some sort of consensus for ultimate objectives, then we see our allies, frankly, looking after their own self-interests, which of course is perfectly understandable.
All right, thank you, Owen, for your perspective. Overall, how would you assess the U.S.'s use of foreign aid as a tool for bringing stability to areas with fragile or even non-existent democracies? Just generally, especially in the North African Middle East region, full instances of foreign aid utilization, or how do you think the U.S. can approach its overall, or can improve its overall approach to foreign aid?
Now, this is a difficult question, and I think we could take this a number of ways.
Of course.
If we set aside the North African context for a moment, and look at particularly where there have been absence of democracies and where foreign assistance coming from the United States and elsewhere has been effective, I think Eastern Europe after the fall of the Berlin Wall is probably the best example. Now, of course, there are certain anomalies in Europe vis-a-vis the Middle East that helped, I think, pave the way and make the transition from authoritarian states to free market democracies in Eastern Europe more smooth. But if you look at Tunisia was for some time sort of the highlight of the Arab Spring, and after things reversed in Syria and Bahrain and in Egypt, Tunisia sort of stood alone. Unfortunately, at a time when it was going through a rough patch, the U.S. started reducing its foreign assistance to the country. And not only did it reduce its foreign assistance at a time of some backsliding and uncertainty in terms of Tunisia's fledgling democracy, diplomatically, we sort of stepped on the brakes a bit in terms of encouraging and supporting, morally speaking, Tunisian democracy. And at a time when current President Kais Saied was reversing some of the very important gains of the last decade in terms of the Constitution and political party competition in elections, the United States remained silent. And I think this had much to do with both a lack of interest in the United States with situation globally, lack of bandwidth, and I think, just impatience and frustration in the American populace about foreign assistance and America's interests abroad at a time when the United States, particularly during COVID and after COVID, suffering from economic, consequences of that period. So Tunisia is a good example in terms of we were there at the get-go after dictator of 20 years, was peacefully left or was overthrown because of popular outrage. We were there with the international community supporting the transition to democracy, but we didn't have the patience to see it through. These things are not easy; they take time.
Of course.
We're talking about institutions that needed to be reformed. Old habits and memories of dictatorship which continue to persist in the country. So these things take time. We need to be committed and dedicated, and we need to work with our partners on the ground. Right now in Tunisia, we have Tunisians who think that we've abandoned them. We've abandoned them to reemergent dictatorship.
Yeah.
And they're wondering what happened. What happened to the U.S. commitment to the ideals that America has stood proudly before for years. So Eastern Europe's a perfect example where we've been committed. We played the long game. Tunisia was a good example of where initial interest in our part and support for the reform of institutions, for the building of new institutions, made tremendous headway. But when we tired, when we got fatigued, and our attention was distracted, the old ways came back, and you see the situation today. The last of the Arab Spring sort of highlights it's been snuffed out.
Very complex answer. I know it's a very complex topic,
It
but
is.
I guess just to summarize a very, very profound answer, consistency is what we need more of, and just sticking it out and almost finishing what we started.
We look for quick solutions.
Yes.
We're very impatient.
Mm-hmm.
Often our foreign assistance is driven by U.S. funding and budget cycles. So we have to play the long game, and we have to be committed, lest we see backsliding like this occur in Tunisia, and we let our partners down. We built up the hopes and aspirations of several million Tunisians, and now we've walked away.
All right. I appreciate your time with me here today. We've had a wonderful discussion. I really appreciate your insight. This has been Lundon Sheilds from UCF UCF Office of Global Perspectives International Initiatives. Make sure to stay up with all of our events and initiatives at ucfglobalperspectives.org. And that's all for this podcast today. See you next time.